Imagine this. You finally install that gate you've always wanted, only to end up with a K-9 unit practically sicked on you by your neighborhood's notoriously power-hungry HOA enforcer, a woman we'll call Mrs. Davenport. The kicker? She had absolutely no idea my dad happens to be the chief of police, who, believe it or not, decided to come home early that very day. Seriously, what would you do if you got a front-row seat to watch your neighbor's illegally hired wannabe private security force get completely shut down by the exact authority they were so poorly pretending to possess? Welcome to my channel. If you're here for juicy stories about entitled folks and HOA nightmares, definitely hit that subscribe button. It all began, innocently enough, with a simple black metal gate. You know the type, sleek, modern, and it slides open smoothly with just the press of a button. Honestly, I'd saved up for months to get it installed. Why? Primarily because random people kept using my driveway as their personal U-turn spot, leaving unsightly tire marks all over the concrete. My dad, being the chief of police, always instilled in me the importance of handling problems the right way. So, naturally, I meticulously checked all the HOA rules, secured the necessary permits, and even chose a design that perfectly complemented our neighborhood's aesthetic. But of course, Mrs. Davenport, my next-door neighbor, seemed determined to turn this simple home improvement project into World War III. The first sign of trouble came when I spotted her brazenly taking pictures of my driveway while I was just trying to water my plants. She wasn't even subtle about it, just standing there, clad in her perfectly pressed tennis outfit, holding up her smartphone like she was documenting a major crime scene. When I offered a friendly wave and asked if everything was all right, she just let out an indignant huff and practically speed-walked back to her immaculate house, her expensive designer sneakers clicking sharply on the sidewalk. Predictably, the very next day, I found a bright yellow notice aggressively stuck to my mailbox. Urgent, unauthorized modification. HOA violation. I genuinely couldn't believe my eyes. The gate had been fully installed for less than 48 hours, and already Mrs. Davenport, our neighborhood's self-appointed HOA enforcer, was launching her attack. Thinking maybe a reasonable conversation would help, I decided to approach her like a normal person. Later that evening, I walked over to her house, armed with all my approval paperwork and even a batch of homemade cookies, my mum's tried-and-true recipe for keeping the peace. However, before I could even press the doorbell, her security camera speaker crackled ominously to life. "I'm documenting everything," Mrs. Davenport's sharp voice announced through the speaker, laced with accusation. "That gate is undeniably reducing our property values. The HOA board will hear about this at tomorrow's emergency meeting." An emergency meeting? Over a gate? It seemed utterly absurd. I tried calling my dad for advice, but unfortunately, he was away attending a police chief's conference in Denver. "Just keep your cool," he advised calmly over the phone. "Document everything on your end. Mrs. Davenport has been pulling stunts like this since before you were born. Remember when she tried to fine the Millers just for having a basketball hoop?" What I didn't grasp then was the extent of Mrs. Davenport's maneuvering. While I was busy overseeing the gate installation, she'd apparently been working overtime, rallying other neighbors against me. Picture this: her going door to door with a petition, showcasing dramatically zoomed-in photos of my supposedly eyesore gate and actively spreading ridiculous rumors that I was secretly planning to turn my house into some kind of commercial business. Later that night, my own security camera sent an alert to my phone. And there she was again, Mrs. Davenport. But this time, she had backup. 2 other HOA board members were with her, furtively measuring my driveway in the dead of night, using flashlights. They were whispering conspiratorially and pointing, undoubtedly plotting their next strategic move. I started recording them on my phone, trying hard not to laugh at how utterly ridiculous they looked, skulking around with their measuring tape like cartoon villains. But then I saw something that made my stomach clench. In Mrs. Davenport's hand was a business card. Zooming in on my security camera footage, I could just make out the name. Guardian HOA Solutions. A quick Google search for the company sent a genuine chill down my spine. They were a private security firm, notorious for employing aggressive, intimidating tactics, and disturbingly, they boasted their own K-9 unit. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mrs. Davenport, of course. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., sharp. Attendance mandatory, bring your checkbook. Fines start at $500 per day. I looked out my window at the gate I'd worked so hard for, the one I'd saved diligently to install. It stood there, gleaming under the soft glow of the streetlights, perfectly aligned, properly permitted, and completely compliant with all written HOA guidelines. What I couldn't know then was that this simple gate was about to become the epicenter of a neighborhood war. And Mrs. Davenport truly had no earthly idea who she was really messing with. As I finally headed to bed, feeling uneasy, my security camera pinged one last time. Mrs. Davenport was back, but this time she wasn't alone. A man dressed in what looked suspiciously like a security uniform was with her, diligently writing in a notebook and nodding intently at whatever she was saying. They both looked directly up at my camera, and I swear Mrs. Davenport actually smiled, the kind of smug, triumphant smile that screams, "Checkmate." Little did she know I had an ace up my sleeve. The question was, would Dad make it back from Denver in time before Mrs. Davenport's private security force turned our quiet, peaceful neighborhood into an absolute battleground? Continue. I woke abruptly to the unmistakable sound of camera clicks right outside my window. Peeking through the blinds confirmed my suspicions. There was Mrs. Davenport, bright and early at 7 a.m., meticulously photographing my gate as if it were crucial evidence at a high-profile crime scene. But this time, she'd brought reinforcements. Her entire cliquey social circle from the HOA board was present, all 5 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder in their matching pastel cardigans, shaking their heads in synchronized disapproval. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed with an official-looking "Emergency HOA meeting" text. Perfect timing, naturally, just when Dad was miles away at his conference. I spent the better part of the morning digging through my files, locating the property survey maps and the official HOA guidelines I had studied so carefully before even starting the gate installation. I knew, without a doubt, that I was entirely in the right. However, Mrs. Davenport possessed an uncanny ability to twist rules and interpretations until they somehow bent to her iron will. Walking into the community center later that evening felt disturbingly like entering a courtroom where the judge, jury, and executioner all happened to play bridge together every Tuesday afternoon. The room was surprisingly packed. I'd never seen so many neighbors attend an HOA meeting before. Clearly, Mrs. Davenport must have promised them quite a dramatic show. "This unauthorized gate is just the beginning," Mrs. Davenport declared dramatically, pointing a laser pointer at her PowerPoint presentation, ominously titled, "The Decline of Our Community Standards." She had somehow managed to edit the photos of my gate to make it look darker, more menacing. "Next thing you know," she continued, her voice rising, "people will be painting their houses purple and parking dilapidated RVs in their driveways." Taking a deep breath, I stood up, property maps firmly in hand. "Actually, Mrs. Davenport," I stated calmly but clearly, "according to Section 7.3 of our official HOA bylaws, automatic gates are permitted as long as they match the home's exterior style and do not exceed 8 feet in height. Mine," I added, holding up the plans, "is exactly 7 feet 2 inches tall and perfectly matches my house trim as required." A hush fell over the room. Mrs. Davenport's face flushed a blotchy red, but she wasn't about to back down. Whipping out a thick folder, she countered, "Well, I've documented 37 separate instances of this gate disrupting the peace. Headlights reflecting into windows, motors humming at all hours, metal squeaking loudly." She then proceeded to pass around a stack of photos showing my gate from every conceivable angle. She even had one taken at midnight, complete with a timestamp. Not to be outdone, I pulled out my phone and played a short video I'd captured just nights before. Footage of Mrs. Davenport's own lawn sprinklers running wildly at 3 a.m., hitting my bedroom windows with surprising force. "Speaking of disrupting the peace," I inquired sweetly, looking around the room, "would anyone perhaps like to discuss the HOA bylaws regarding water conservation and proper sprinkler timing?" That's when she dropped her bombshell. "The board has already voted," she announced triumphantly. "We've hired Guardian HOA Solutions. They are a professional HOA enforcement team, and they will handle this situation properly." She flashed that smug smile again, the one that made her look like a cat who had just successfully cornered a terrified mouse. I almost laughed out loud. Private security, though, for a simple gate dispute? It seemed utterly ludicrous. But then Gary, who lived 2 doors down, spoke up nervously. They're serious professionals, folks. My cousin's HOA used them last year. They've got patrol cars, official-looking uniforms, even K-9 units." The meeting concluded abruptly with a stern warning: remove the gate within 48 hours or face the unspecified consequences. Driving home, I tried to convince myself this was just another one of Mrs. Davenport's typical power trips. After all, she'd tried and failed to force the Smith family to remove their perfectly normal basketball hoop just last summer, eventually backing down when they pushed back. However, as I pulled into my driveway that night, I noticed unfamiliar tire tracks on the street right in front of my house. Then, tucked conspicuously into my door frame, catching the glare of my porch light, I found it. A crisp business card. Guardian HOA Solutions, HOA Enforcement Division. On the back, someone had crudely written, "First warning." Little did they know, I'd already started my own investigation into this so-called security company. One quick online search had revealed a troubling history of complaints and aggressive tactics in other neighborhoods. But before I could dig any deeper, I saw something through my living room window that made my blood run cold. 3 menacing black patrol cars, lights off, but unmistakably official-looking, slowly turning onto our street, their dark forms gliding through the quiet neighborhood darkness. The next morning, I was sipping my coffee, trying to mentally prepare for the day, when I heard it. Growling. Not just any growling, but the deep, trained, authoritative bark of a police K-9 unit. My hands started to shake uncontrollably as I cautiously peeked through the blinds. What I saw outside made my jaw drop. 3 imposing black SUVs emblazoned with Guardian HOA Solutions on the sides had effectively surrounded my driveway. And there stood Mrs. Davenport, looking smugly official in her pressed beige pantsuit, holding up her phone to meticulously record the entire unfolding drama. Beside her, a large German shepherd strained against its leash, held by a man in a uniform that looked unnervingly like a real police officer's, but not quite. "This is your final warning," shouted the man, presumably the leader, in a mock authoritative voice, his tone amplified slightly, perhaps by a small speaker system. "Remove this unauthorized structure within the next hour, or we will be forced to take action." As if for emphasis, the dog lunged forward aggressively, barking ferociously, causing me to instinctively jump back from the window. I simply couldn't believe this was actually happening, all over a simple automatic gate that perfectly matched every other gate in the neighborhood, except for the minor detail that mine was black, instead of the more common brown. Grabbing my own phone, I immediately started recording too. My hands were definitely shaking, but I managed to zoom in on the badges worn by the uniformed men. Something looked decidedly off about them. The metal wasn't catching the morning sunlight quite right. They lacked the distinct glint of real, official police badges. 3 years spent working part-time at Dad's precinct during college summers had taught me at least that much. "Ma'am, we have reports of multiple HOA violations," the lead officer called out, now pounding forcefully on my front door. I could clearly hear Mrs. Davenport's shrill voice providing commentary in the background. "I told you, she's been defiant for weeks. Just look at how that hideous gate ruins our property values." Ignoring the pounding, I quickly opened my laptop and pulled up the county's official security contractor licensing database. Just as I suspected and hoped, there were no licensed K-9 units registered for private security work in our entire county district. My heart was still racing, pounding against my ribs, but now a surge of adrenaline-fueled confidence washed over me. They were bluffing, operating outside the law, and I had concrete proof. The pounding on my door grew louder, more insistent. "This is your last chance before we are forced to release the dog." Through my security camera feed, displayed on my monitor, I could see curious neighbors starting to gather on their lawns, phones out, whispering amongst themselves. Mrs. Davenport was practically bouncing, with barely contained excitement, her perfectly styled grey hair bobbing as she narrated the entire scene for her own video recording. Quickly, I grabbed the property maps and HOA documents I'd printed out weeks ago when this whole ridiculous saga began, clearly showing my gate was fully within my property line and compliant with all rules. Then, taking a deep breath, I dialed Dad's number, praying fervently that he'd pick up, even though he was supposed to be hundreds of miles away at that conference. The K-9 handler was actually unclipping the dog's leash when I heard it. The familiar, authoritative rumble of Dad's official police cruiser turning decisively onto our street. Mrs. Davenport was so engrossed in filming my front door, anticipating my forced surrender, that she didn't even notice him pulling up directly behind the black SUVs, his emergency lights now silently flashing. "This is Chief Williams," Dad's voice boomed, amplified through his cruiser's external speaker system, instantly cutting through the tension. "All unauthorized security personnel, stand down immediately." The look of utter shock and disbelief that washed over Mrs. Davenport's face was, quite frankly, better than any Christmas present I'd ever received. Her phone actually slipped from her stunned fingers as she spun around, her mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for air. The fake officers froze mid-action, and their German shepherd, interestingly, sat down immediately. At least it seemed well-trained enough to recognize real authority. Seizing the moment, I stepped out onto my front porch, holding up my own phone, which was still recording everything. "Mrs. Davenport," I announced clearly, my voice steadier than I expected, "I believe you and your hired associates here are currently in violation of County Ordinance 14.7 regarding the impersonation of law enforcement officers and state regulations regarding the operation of an unlicensed K-9 unit for security purposes. Would you perhaps like me to show you the relevant documentation?" Just then, two real police cars pulled up swiftly behind Dad's cruiser. I instantly recognized Officer Miller and Officer Chen. They'd both been over for our family barbecues numerous times. Seeing them, Mrs. Davenport started backing away slowly, stammering incoherently about how she was merely trying to maintain neighborhood standards and protect property values. The fake officers, meanwhile, were already cautiously putting their hands up, likely realizing just how much serious trouble they were suddenly in. Their German Shepherd looked utterly confused, glancing back and forth between its handler and the real police officers, as if trying desperately to figure out who it was supposed to obey. But this dramatic confrontation wasn't quite over yet. As Dad stepped purposefully out of his cruiser, straightening his chief's uniform jacket, Mrs. Davenport's expression suddenly hardened. She reached deliberately into her expensive designer purse, and I saw her pull out something that made my blood run cold. Actual, official-looking HOA papers, bearing what looked disturbingly like a real county seal. I couldn't believe my eyes when Dad's police cruiser pulled up. His conference wasn't supposed to end for another 2 days. Mrs. Davenport's face, as previously mentioned, turned ghost white as she watched him step out, resplendent in his full chief's uniform, his gold badge gleaming impressively in the morning sun. Predictably, the fake security team suddenly looked far less sure of themselves, and even their German Shepherd stopped barking, sensing the shift in authority. "What's going on here?" Dad's voice boomed again, commanding attention across my driveway. Before anyone could stammer out a response, he spotted the K-9 unit, and his eyes narrowed sharply. Who authorized a police-style K-9 unit in my jurisdiction? The lead security officer stumbled over his words. "Sir, we're from Guardian HOA Solutions, sir. Hired by the Homeowners Association to enforce." "Show me your company's K-9 unit license," Dad cut him off curtly, already pulling out his own phone. "And your state security company credentials, now." Mrs. Davenport tried to subtly slip away toward her house, but Dad noticed immediately. "Ma'am," he called out firmly, "I suggest you stay right there. We have some significant questions regarding the hiring of unlicensed, potentially armed security personnel to intimidate residents, specifically my family." At that moment, I quickly pulled up the videos I'd been diligently recording on my phone over the past few weeks, documenting Mrs. Davenport's escalating harassment campaign. The way she'd deliberately aimed her sprinklers onto my driveway every single morning, how she'd strategically shone bright spotlights into my windows late at night, and recordings of all those times she'd called in completely bogus noise complaints against me. The lead security officer was visibly sweating now. "Mrs. Davenport assured us," he stammered, trying to deflect blame, "that this entire operation was pre-approved by local law enforcement." Dad scrolled through something on his phone, his expression grim. "Well, that's fascinating," he said dryly, "because I'm currently looking at our county's licensed security provider database right now. Guardian HOA Solutions isn't even registered as a legitimate company here. Furthermore," he added, his voice hardening, "those uniforms you're wearing? That constitutes impersonating law enforcement officers, a serious offense." Just then, the two additional police cruisers rounded the corner, their lights now flashing brightly. As mentioned, I recognized Officer Miller and Officer Chen. The fake security team instinctively started backing up towards their SUVs, but Dad's voice stopped them cold. "Nobody moves. Those officers," he gestured towards Miller and Chen, "are responding because I just reported potentially armed individuals impersonating law enforcement officers on this street. And Mrs. Davenport," he turned his gaze directly to her, "I'm especially interested in reviewing these receipts my department just uncovered, showing you apparently paid this illegal operation using official HOA funds." Finally, Mrs. Davenport completely lost her composure. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my gate. "He's the one breaking HOA rules with that hideous gate. I am simply protecting our property values." Stepping forward again, I held up the property maps and the official HOA guidelines I'd studied so thoroughly. "Actually, Mrs. Davenport," I interjected calmly, "there is absolutely nothing in the written HOA rules prohibiting security gates of this type, provided they meet the aesthetic and height requirements, which mine does. I checked every single page. However," I continued, looking pointedly at the other neighbors, who were now gathered, "there are very specific rules against using HOA funds without proper board approval." "Did you," I asked her directly, "obtain formal board approval before hiring these gentlemen?" The color drained completely from her face, as several of my neighbors started murmuring amongst themselves, phones still held high, recording. Someone nearby muttered that they were live-streaming the entire event to our neighborhood's private Facebook group. Even the fake security team's German Shepherd whined softly and sat down again, clearly sensing the definitive shift in power. Dad turned to Officer Miller and Officer Chen. "Book them," he instructed crisply, gesturing towards the fake security team. "Impersonating law enforcement, operating without a license. Check for weapons too. And Mrs. Davenport," he added, his voice leaving no room for argument, "needs to come down to the station to explain exactly how HOA funds were allegedly utilized to hire an illegal, unlicensed security force to intimidate residents." As Officers Miller and Chen efficiently led the fake security guys and a sputtering Mrs. Davenport away in handcuffs, I noticed Mr. Evans, the actual HOA board president, watching the entire spectacle unfold from his porch across the street. The expression on his face, a mixture of shock, dismay, and perhaps relief, told me that Mrs. Davenport's reign of terror over our neighborhood was, at long last, finally over. Yet somehow, I had a feeling this wasn't quite the end of the story. There were likely many other HOA residents who had been bullied or intimidated by her over the years, and now perhaps their stories were finally about to come to light. I watched, utterly amazed, as my dad expertly took complete control of the chaotic situation, his chief's badge gleaming reassuringly in the bright morning sun. As predicted, the fake security team's faces turned utterly pale when he started systematically checking their credentials against official databases on his phone. Mrs. Davenport, despite her earlier bravado, seemed to shrink under his authoritative gaze after her attempt to slip away was thwarted. Within mere minutes, the arrival of the real police cars, lights flashing, solidified the gravity of the situation for everyone watching. More neighbors emerged from their houses, phones dutifully recording every dramatic moment. As it turned out, the K-9 handler couldn't produce any valid certification for the dog, and a quick check of their vehicle registrations revealed the SUVs weren't even registered to a legitimate security company. They were essentially just a group of wannabe cops Mrs. Davenport had apparently hired through some sketchy online advertisement. Furthermore, Dad's initial questioning quickly uncovered that this bogus outfit had been threatening other homeowners in our neighborhood too, allegedly collecting fake fines for trivial violations and simply pocketing the money. That's when one of my elderly neighbors, Mrs. Garcia, came forward, tears streaming down her face. She hesitantly explained how she'd paid them $500 just last month because Mrs. Davenport had insisted her small, melodic wind chimes were too noisy and violated some non-existent HOA rule. The truth began to spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. Someone quickly found Mrs. Davenport's not-so-private social media posts where she'd been bragging for weeks about how she was going to clean up the neighborhood her way, using professional enforcers. The local news crew likely tipped off by the Facebook live stream, showed up just as the fake security team was being formally handcuffed and placed into police cruisers. Ms. Davenport, still protesting loudly, screamed about her authority, her reputation, and demanded her lawyer, but by then, nobody was listening anymore. Later that evening, an emergency HOA meeting was convened, a real one, this time. The atmosphere was electric. One by one, people stood up and shared stories that were genuinely hard to believe. It became chillingly clear that Mrs. Davenport had been running our neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom for years. Tales emerged of her forcing a single mum to repaint her house 3 times in a single summer because the shade wasn't exactly to her liking. Another neighbor recounted how she'd made a decorated veteran take down his small American flag because, according to her, it wasn't the correct shade of red specified in some obscure guideline she'd likely invented. Unsurprisingly, the HOA board voted unanimously to remove Mrs. Davenport from her position on the spot. As she stormed out of the community center in a huff, fate delivered a small, ironic blow. She slipped on a patch of wet grass, ironically, likely from her own improperly aimed sprinklers, and landed right in the mud, bordering her own meticulously maintained, award-winning flower bed. Honestly, I wanted to laugh, but seeing her there, covered in mud, stripped of her power, I mostly just felt a strange sort of pity. All that relentless, power-hungry behavior had ultimately left her with nothing but pending legal charges, a tarnished reputation, and precisely 0 friends in the neighborhood she claimed to care so much about. The following weeks were, frankly, amazing. Our newly energized HOA board, now led by the kind and sensible Mrs. Garcia, immediately shifted focus towards actually helping neighbors rather than harassing them. They formally approved my gate design and, in a twist of irony, even used its specifications as a model for developing new, reasonable security guidelines for the entire neighborhood. Inspired, several other neighbors started installing similar, stylish gates, effectively turning Mrs. Davenport's initial point of complaint into a popular neighborhood trend. The fake security team, as expected, faced serious charges, including impersonating law enforcement and fraud. However, the biggest shock came during their preliminary court hearing. They revealed text messages explicitly showing that Mrs. Davenport had specifically instructed them to be aggressive, to use the K-9, even knowing it wasn't properly licensed, to scare people into compliance. She'd even provided them with a detailed list of specific neighbors to target, mostly families or individuals she apparently thought wouldn't or couldn't fight back. Dad made sure the entire sordid story, complete with the evidence of fund misuse and targeted harassment, reached the state's HOA Oversight Committee. As a result, they launched a broader investigation into potential power abuses and financial irregularities in other HOAs across the county. My seemingly small problem with a gate had inadvertently uncovered a whole network of HOA bullies and questionable practices. Perhaps the funniest part of the whole affair, my dad did end up installing a new gate at his own house shortly after. But instead of doing it to spite Mrs. Davenport or make a point, he cleverly turned the installation process into a neighborhood security workshop. He invited everyone over, brought in actual police officers, community relations experts, not tactical units, pals, and provided practical advice on real home security measures, proper adherence to bylaws, and knowing your rights as a homeowner. Even Mrs. Davenport's husband quietly attended, confiding in a few of us that he'd always thought his wife had gone way too far, but felt powerless to stop her. Today, my black metal gate still stands, sliding open smoothly every morning. It serves as a constant reminder that standing up to bullies, especially those hiding behind flimsy rules and inflated titles, actually works. It's proof that knowing the rules yourself, documenting everything, and acting correctly are powerful tools. Mrs. Davenport moved away last month, selling her house quickly and likely below market value given the circumstances. But just before she left, I caught her one last time, standing on the sidewalk, taking pictures of my gate again. This time, though, she wasn't documenting violations. According to the neighbor who bought her house, she was looking up companies to potentially install a similar one at her new house. Sometimes, perhaps, the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but simply showing someone a better, more reasonable way to live. This story is a powerful reminder that unchecked power, even on a small scale like an HOA board, can lead to abuse and harm innocent people. It highlights the critical importance of knowing your rights, understanding the actual rules, not just someone's interpretation of them, and meticulously documenting everything when you face unfair treatment. Standing up for yourself, calmly and correctly, can not only solve your own problem, but might also uncover larger issues and help protect others in your community. Don't be afraid to challenge bullies, especially when you have the facts on your side. What would you have done in this situation? Have you ever had a nightmare HOA experience? Share your stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.